I feel like you're driving a bus. It's like, all right, kids, here we go. We're going to make a left turn.
Yeah. But the valve covers had cork gasket chunks in it, some black other material gasket, and 2 colors of RTV. So just bought new cork gasket, some kind of old school.
These cookies are amazing.
There he goes. Ford rolls out in that same year of the fuel crisis, the Mustang 2.
Oh.
They sold 385,000.
What?
I know.
I'm your host, John Melton.
I'm Donnie Whiteman.
We are 2 Bronco enthusiasts who love talking about Broncos. We own Broncos. We both work on Broncos. Donnie professionally, me unprofessionally. Our sponsors for this episode are Tom's Off-Road and ARP. As your Christmas list is growing, make sure to head over to Tom's Off-Road for all your Bronco needs. And if you're working on that engine, ARP, they've got the studs for you. That's not really their slogan. Probably shouldn't
They
use
do have
that.
studs.
But we do too at the BronCast.
Well, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a little bit about the Gen 6, but we're going to focus on Gen 1, 1971 to 1975, and 76 to 77.
Yeah. And I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this episode. It's been kind of a long time coming. Like, we've been working through how the Bronco got started. And in this episode, we're kind of finishing up the first generation, and it's exciting. I'm excited to jump into the material.
There's so much more than we thought. We're going to have to take packages and do a whole nother episode on that.
Yeah. We will come back to this, we will come back to the history as we move on. But yeah, this will be a good kind of wrap up episode towards the end of the year. But before we get into that, what's been going on in your world this week?
Well, I was going to ask you, did you get any interesting emails from our listeners?
Oh, we've gotten a lot of good emails, actually. And let me give our audience here a little tease to some things that are up and coming, because I'm loving the stuff that we're getting. David Bruner, he said, love listening to the podcast. He wanted us to talk about what it takes to rebuild a Dana 20 versus just going out and buying an Atlas transfer case, which, man, that is a great topic to talk about. We're not going to talk about it today, but I'm excited for that one. Les was asking what it takes to put in a Coyote into an early Bronco.
Yeah, that's a good discussion.
Yes, really good. Which I think we're going to tease you guys a little bit, but next year we've got some good podcasts planned. And Ryan emailed us, and this is actually going to be our first, we will tell you this will be our first podcast episode of next year, 2023. And he said, I'm flying into a Bronco event from Alaska.
Wow.
Which is the best one to go to? And I was like, oh man, that's a tough question. But we're going to talk about all things 2023 Bronco events for next year.
That'll be good. I got a comment
Yeah.
from a friend of mine. He said I had a face for radio. So that's like podcasts. It's the same as long as you don't videotape it.
Right. Too bad we are videotaping it.
Yeah.
That's great. I got a little fan mail from my own son.
Ah.
And Clark is, how old is he? 9? The pressure is on. How old's my son? He said, the BronCast is amazing. I will support you the whole way. And then he goes on to talk about it. Dad, you're the best, and you're doing amazing on the BronCast. So, like, it was really funny. My kids, they've heard us talking about the podcast. They've heard me and Bethany, my wife, talking about it, and just different stuff. Well, my daughter, I forget if I mentioned this on the podcast, but she was like, can I get Spotify on my, like, she has a little iPod mini or whatever they are. And she was like, can I get Spotify? And I was like, no, you don't need Spotify. And she was like, no, I really want Spotify. And I'm like, what are you going to listen to? And she was like, well, I wanted to listen to your podcast. And I was like, oh, okay.
Well, in that case.
Yeah, in that case. So all the kids have been listening to it. I still don't think my wife has listened to it.
That's awesome. My kids listen to it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
my son has some really good feedback. So
nice.
Nice. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Bronco news, in the news front. SEMA was a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that popped up, a lot of things popped up at SEMA Bronco wise, but one of the things that I really thought was cool was this Bronco Pro Runner. APG Off-Road is putting it together, and it's the ultimate performance package for the Ford Bronco. But it's like they're doing this package with 40-inch tires like coilovers. But what I really liked about it was their take on the fenders. Like, I haven't loved the fenders on the new Bronco. And so anytime someone does something that is really just unique, I'm always like, ooh, that's cool. And so at SEMA, they debuted their Pro Runner. And if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It looks pretty cool. No idea what this company does or anything like that, but it's one of those things where it's like you pay them and they will put the package on. So they're not selling the fenders or the suspension or anything like that, but they're doing like these upgrades to your Bronco, putting 40s on it and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that's cool. In other G6 news, the ordering banks are not going to reopen for the Bronco until February 23rd. Is what I've heard. So we'll be talking about that for a while. I think that's pretty interesting. I'm trying to score someone's 4-door right now.
Oh yeah.
So I have someone that wants the 2-door, and my wife's just like, if I had 4 doors, I'd get one. So I think I'm going to try and get her to buy that one.
Yeah.
So, but I think it'll make a good tow vehicle too, and seats a lot more people, carries a lot more stuff. So yeah, I really want to try 4-door next.
Nice. I don't know if you're listening to this podcast, you don't get to see this, but our producer Josh's wife makes the most amazing cookies I've ever tasted, and I have 2 of them on this desk, and they will probably slowly disappear as the episode goes on.
If I hear some crunching, I'll know. We'll all know what it was.
If you hear moaning, that's all it is. If you hear moaning in this episode, it's just me eating
the chocolate chip cookie.
Yeah. But they look delicious.
The Rachel Toller chocolate chip cookie.
That's right.
There was a Gen 6 guy. I saw a post on the internet that said he was recently driving through a snowstorm in northern Ohio, and it's like ice and slush and snow, and he said he put it in goat mode, and he said he had 100% traction the whole time.
Oh man.
He said it was absolutely amazing. So goat mode is like snow mode.
Well, there's the slippery goat mode. And then I forget all the goat modes, but I think it's slick, like slippery wet. And that's the best one because it actually, I do know this from my work with Bronco Nation, it actually decreases your pedal sensitivity on your throttle so you don't spin the tires, which is genius when you're driving in the snow.
Makes you drive like an old lady.
Yeah. I mean, you can still get up to speed, but if you accidentally step on it real hard, it's not going to spin,
that's
spin
cool.
you out. Yeah. And it moves the power to the wheels, as they need it and stuff like that. Pretty cool.
We haven't had any weather here yet.
No.
So Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah. We might have one snow later this year.
Oh, yeah.
Well, moving on into our episode, DIY or PAY. And today, ARP is one of our sponsors, which just makes us think about bolts and fasteners and that kind of thing. And so we just wanted to talk a little bit about checking and possibly replacing the bolts on your Bronco, kind of in the order of importance so you don't fall out of your Bronco. So starting with seat belts. And this is one of those important things that it is important to check, and just to check the life of that bolt. I think it's a, pretty small bolt that's going through your seatbelt, going right into the tub of the Bronco. Super easy to check. This is one wrench. There's definitely something that if you own an early Bronco, you should go out there and check your seatbelt bolts, and just make sure they're not old and rusty and crusty and falling apart.
And your seat bolts, while you're at it, a lot of people add aftermarket seats and they'll use really cheap bolts, and they come loose because maybe they didn't get them tight or the seat vibrates. So check your seat bolts also.
Yeah. This is the seatbelt bolt, and then this is the actual. No, this is the seatbelt bolt. It's pretty easy. I just put together the rear bench seat in my 75 so the kids could ride around with me, and replaced all the bolts and bought a bolt kit from Tom's Off-Road. I think the bolt kit was $20, and it gave you all the bolts for all the front seats, rear seats, and seat belts. So $20, you could have all new bolts for your Bronco.
And if you bought a Bronco recently, a 66 to 77, or any generation actually, not new, definitely check like roll cage bolts, because again, those were put in afterwards, usually by an owner, not by a dealer or anything like that. So you just want to check all those bolts.
Yep.
Half the time they're loose.
Yeah.
And you don't want to find out later.
Exactly.
So,
well, and even, I'm going to jump down the hard top. Those, all of mine have rusted, because it just gets wet. My hard top leaks. So all those bolts have rusted. So, that's another one. You said roll cage, also checking the hard top. That's an easy check. And those bolts, that's what this is. Those bolts are super cheap and easy to replace, so yeah.
And I think, suspension bolts, you go underneath the front of the truck, check your U-bolts at the back, where, your suspension bolts to the axles, and just go through them. First of all, make sure they're all there.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of times on the suspension, if you've got aftermarket suspension also, there'll be a castle nut. Looks like, a crown of King's Crown.
Yep.
And there should be a hole drilled through the bolt itself, or the steering rod end, or whatever. There should be
tie rod.
What am I thinking of?
Yeah, a hole for the castle pin. For the cotter pin. Yeah.
Yeah. And if there's not a cotter pin and you don't have one handy, at least run a wire through it until you get a cotter pin. But definitely want to make sure those don't come off.
Cotter pins are super cheap. Buy them for $1, $3 at AutoZone or O'Reilly's, wherever you go.
For a package of them.
Yeah. But definitely you want to check that. And, suspension is one of those things, and steering, you mentioned steering, that you just want to know that, they're on there tight, because how many times you're driving down the road and you start feeling a little shake and you're like, what is that?
That's right.
And you want to know that your bolts are tight and that they're in good condition. I grabbed this one. This is the rear shackle bolt for my leaf spring that I was putting on my 74. Again, Tom's Off-Road, they sell the kit of bolts, but also ARP. These are the kinds of bolts, suspension, steering, and even engine that ARP really excels at with that.
Anytime I'm disassembling a Bronco, we're not even going to use the body or whatever, or I'm working on an engine or suspension or steering, there's probably 50% of the time the bolts are wrong.
Yeah.
Which means that they're not threaded all the way in. They're the wrong size. They're stripped, So another thing is just to make sure all the bolts are properly torqued. Yeah. There are torque specs for everything. Not everything on the Bronco, but, there are torque specs. They should be tightened to 12 pounds or 45 pounds or greater, depending on what the bolt is. So like on the engine, the bolts around the engine, if your engine's leaking, a lot of times people think, I just got to tighten them up. When the reality is we just took some valve covers off an engine. We did the whole front and top of the engine. It was leaking everywhere. It was a black clod of dirt.
Yeah.
It was actually blue when we cleaned it. But so we had to replace bolts, and as we're taking the timing cover off, there's 2 broken bolts, and then we're taking more parts off. Yeah. We took the intake off. Someone had snapped one of those, which means they're way over torquing them. So bolts break when you go too tight.
Yeah.
So we cleaned this whole thing up, new gaskets, painted everything, put it back on. But the valve covers had cork gasket chunks in it, some black other material gasket, and 2 colors of RTV. So just bought new cork gaskets. I'm kind of old school, and the cork gaskets were $24.99 at O'Reilly's.
Yep.
And we cleaned the inside of the valve cover, we cleaned the surface on the head, and I cranked those down, and I used traditional petroleum-based oil in this guy's engine.
There you go.
Thought you'd be happy about that.
Yes. A little zinc additive.
And put some zinc additive in it. That's
there
right.
You go.
Yeah.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
now it won't leak. Now his engine's going to stay pretty blue, and if it does leak, he'll see where it's leaking this time.
Yeah. I think that's a huge point. Yeah. Just here's our reminder for you guys to check your bolts, check your valve cover gaskets, check your engine bolts, suspension, all that good stuff, because we don't want you to crash in your early Bronco due to a bolt failure. That'd be silly.
Okay, Bronco history for 1971 to 1975. Sort of group these together because those years are all very similar, and then 76 and 77 are, to me, unique.
Yeah.
They actually really started to make some big changes. But from 71 to 75, in the last episode, we talked about numbers from 66 to 1970, and then 1970, they just didn't change much. But from 71 to 75, they changed quite a bit. We got a lot of great stuff. So starting with 71, Ford rolls out a lot of consumer-demanded upgrades, options that people had just been waiting for. Other manufacturers had them, and Bronco just didn't get them. But so they lost thousands of sales to other companies by not having an automatic transmission, for example. Wow. So one of the first things that they did was they added the automatic transmission, a 3-speed automatic, to the 3-speed manual, which was on the column. They call that 3 on the tree because it kind of looks like a bunch of branches sticking out the column. But they put the automatic up there too, which is pretty cool. So
that's what mine is, and I love it. Like everyone looks at the twin stick shifter and thinks, "Oh, you drive a manual," and I'm like, actually, it's an automatic because it's right there on the column.
Yeah. It's not that there wasn't a manual transmission. They still sold probably 50% or more were manual transmissions. So the second thing that they came out with was power steering, which is a huge deal because everybody else had power steering. The Dana axle, they came out with a Dana 44.
Oh, okay.
So
that's when it hit. 71.
And it's just kind of interesting because these are 3 changes that everyone was asking for and waiting for, and then they finally just in 71 they started rolling these things out. Bronco production sales were pretty consistent from 71 to 75, really to 74, ranging from like 20 to 25,000 units each year, which really isn't that many. I think in 71 there were 21,000 Broncos produced, and just to compare that, the Mustang in 71, 125,000 units.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then in 1972, 21,000 Broncos, amidst a fuel crisis and the results of a bad economy. In 73 and about the same number, but in 1974 was the biggest year for the Bronco. There were 25,824 produced amidst a fuel crisis, and Ford rolls out in that same year of the fuel crisis the Mustang 2.
Oh.
They sold 385,000.
What?
I know. I thought they made like less than the Bronco.
Yeah.
Totally got that wrong. That car was a smash the first year.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Mustang too.
Yeah.
Man.
Such a huge, it's funny. I had no idea until I looked that number up. But then in 1975, the Broncos suffers a huge 50% decrease. They make 13,000 units.
Wow.
I always thought there were more Broncos made than this.
Yeah.
I would have thought, maybe half as many as the Mustang. But
right.
No, the Mustang was usually 8 to 10 times.
Man.
Anywhere from 5 to 10 times. But many years the numbers were 200 to 300,000 Mustangs to 20,000 Broncos.
That's crazy.
So
what's so interesting too, during this time you have, I think it was 73, the 6th generation of the F1 F100 or F-150, I forget, F-100 came out. And that's what the second generation Bronco was modeled after, was the sixth generation F-100. And their plan was in 74 to launch the second generation Bronco. But because of the fuel embargo, because of the like recession and all this that's going on, they ended up just canning it. And it's just so interesting. I think about often like what would have happened if the Bronco first gen was only, would have been 8 years. And the second generation, instead of only being 2 years, was 5 years. Like just the difference, you know, what, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe nothing, but you know, it's just interesting to think about that, you know, was kind of one of the points of like, nope, we're not going to be able to launch the new second generation Bronco.
Well, and somewhere in here, you know, those are production numbers. That doesn't mean that's what they sold in the U.S. Somewhere in here, there are 9,000 units that get shipped to Iceland.
Wow.
And I wonder if it wasn't right in this early 70s that they went. I know on the Bring Back Bronco series on podcast, Sonari talks about that and says, I don't remember if he says what year it is.
Yeah, I don't remember.
And so, you know, that supposedly in Iceland, you can drive around and in a day see like 8 or 10 Broncos in use.
Yeah.
And they're not restored. They're still using them just like an F-100.
Well, and even Bronco Nation went to Iceland with one of the new Broncos and kind of did an homage to the classics being out there and met with some of the Bronco clubs out there. It was a really cool video that they put out on YouTube. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, just, you know, you wonder, was it 74, that year where there was the most, and they had 9,000 extras that they just shipped out to Iceland?
In our podcast metrics, one of our first subscribers was from Iceland. Yeah. We're like, what? He's like number 6.
Yep. Yeah, he's a good guy. I can't say his name, but if you're listening, Asugar, I don't know if that's how you say your name. I can see it. Thank you, our Iceland buddy. Yeah, that's super interesting with that 74, 75 time, with the economy being down and everything. You know, everyone was looking at fuel economy and looking at why would we get these gas guzzling SUVs kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. And then we've got some information here on the different years, 72 through 75. We talked about the consistent production numbers, the Strop Broncos being made. There are, I think, 80 Strop Broncos the first year as a package. I kind of like to talk about them separately because this is their window when they were actually a package, and it was besides the sport package, they're in standard, there really weren't many packages. And then they really start to explode. But Ranger packages, in addition with Explorer packages. What is your Bronco?
Mine is a sport package, and you know, there's all these little nuances and differences that Jimmy Golden, who is on the podcast, would be a good one to tell us all about all the differences. But the biggest thing that I remember is the trim that goes on the outside. Like that's the sport trim. And then you have like the Explorer package, which I think changed some of the seats. And you got, you know, I think the Explorer package was the one with the houndstooth seats and different colored interiors and stuff like that. And I think in 73 was when the Ranger package came out. But, you know, it's all marketing stuff. You know, it's like Ford is like, how can we hit a new market? You know, how can we kind of get a new market in, and what can we put in there to kind of interest them and these different things. But yeah.
So in 1971 is when Dana comes out with a 3,000 pound Dana axle and 3,000 pound capacity. And then, versus the Dana 30, which was like 2,500 pounds.
Yeah.
But everybody wanted that bigger axle.
Yep.
And then in 72, I think there was a 21,115 produced, and 1,307 were the pickups, the half cab, utility vehicle. So those numbers were starting to fall off. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We sort of tracked the half cab numbers during these 71 through 75 years because it actually goes away. So I think the Sport and Ranger packages are also added in 72. Maybe that's the first year for the Ranger then.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
And so there were 7,732 Sport packages sold in 72, just to give you an idea of how many people upgraded. When you think about, that's more than a third of total production.
Wow.
So that's the last year for the inline six as a 170 cubic inch engine, and then it goes to a 200 cubic inch, and it rivals the horsepower and torque of the 302. So
you're saying a 72 inline six is the inline six to 72 and up inline six.
Well, and they eventually go, not in the Bronco, but in like the trucks, they go up to a 300 cubic inch inline six, which would fit right inside. And, you can make all kinds of power with an inline six with things called like lump ports and, a hot cam, and you can throw turbos on them. They'll handle all kinds of stuff. It's sort of a popular thing in the pickup truck world right now to have a different engine in your truck instead of a,
LS
an
or
LS and a
Coyote,
Chevy or a Coyote. A lot of guys are building inline sixes.
That's cool.
There's all kinds of room for a turbo.
Yeah.
So I'd
cool.
love to see someone build an inline six in a Bronco. I think that'd be neat.
Yeah.
I don't think you need a turbo, but
no.
So there's the C4. There's basically that's the only automatic that's come out, right?
Right. Yeah.
They don't ever make another one.
No, not until AOD, which isn't offered in first generation. It wasn't around in the first generation Bronco. So yeah, C4 was the only automatic transmission offered in the first generation Bronco.
Right. And then in 1973, there is a transfer case change from a T-shift to a J-stick.
Yep.
Is that right? T-shifts first, J-sticks second.
I think that's
They're
right.
both Dana 20s.
Yep.
So we were just talking about that the other day.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, it's how you shift. It's I think a T-stick. Let's see. I'm trying to get this right. I believe the J you have on the left too high, then you go down to, I'm trying to picture it in my mind, neutral, and then it's like to the right and up to 4 high, and then all the way up to 4 low. I believe that's what it is. Someone's going to correct us, I'm sure, about it. And then T is just straight up and down. So 2 high, neutral, 4 high, 4 low.
Yeah. Okay. And then in 1974, there's 21,800 made. Still, those numbers are just so consistent.
Yeah.
And it's like the last year in 74 that they used this truck called the Shelby Bronco in their ads. They used that truck for 8 years in their ads and just kept repainting it.
The Shelby Bronco?
Yeah, remember we talked about that with Jimmy?
Yeah.
He said it was one of the first known production Broncos. It's in like the marketing ads, and they just kept photo retouching it and painting on trim and marker lights. And
wow.
And I don't know how many different colors the truck was, but it still has the snaps from the vinyl top where it was a Roadster at one time in like 66 in an ad.
Man.
And that's the one that Gateway Bronco owns.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, but they call it the Shelby, and I still don't know why it's called the Shelby Broncos, but has nothing to do with like Carroll Shelby.
Right.
So
that's so interesting. We need to do a whole other episode on the Strop Bronco, because that was going on around here too. But you mentioned they kept using the Shelby Bronco. Well, they used the Strop Bronco in a Bronco ad, in a Ford Bronco ad, after they had closed production for the Strop.
Oh,
and so it was like same kind of thing, it was like the Baja edition Bronco was in this Bronco ad a year after they had said Strop had closed down and no more Strop. So it's interesting.
Well, when we go to 76 and 77, it pops back up again.
Really?
So, yeah, I'll tell you about that when we get there. So to me, 1975 is kind of a sad year because there aren't any good-looking cars anymore. They're all boxes. My dad bought a 70 '74 Impala, and it literally looked like a box. There's not much styling to it, but everybody is about just inexpensive fuel economy. And I feel like the Bronco was the only vehicle that still had shape, and it's because they just didn't restyle it or come out with a new one. It's kind of like the checker cab never got changed. They just kept making the Bronco, but it was the only shapely vehicle still in the market. So it's kind of cool that they just kept producing it, because those years are, in my opinion, with all the features and drivability and looks, really some of the most valuable to me. Big production drops down to 13,125 units in 75. That's just huge. And it had a big V8 engine. That probably had a lot to do with it.
Yep.
My dad was driving a 71 Beetle that he traded in on the Impala. So, that's how bad fuel economy was. I remember the Impala was way underpowered. I preferred the Beetle.
Yeah.
So I think the price of the Beetle was like $1,900 brand new.
Crazy.
And it was all optioned out. It was a Super Beetle, which means it came with a radio.
Nice.
Yeah, that was it. So, you go from 75 being really sad to 76 being like,
yeah.
Now they're making a real truck out of this Bronco because the other one's not ready.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said earlier, like the Bronco, the second generation Bronco was scheduled to come out in 74. America, kind of hits this recession point. And, if you think about it, it's so much easier to just do upgrades to your current line of vehicles rather than completely changing every part of the factory line. It's like, and that's what they chose to do to save money, was we'll just keep rolling with this, the first generation and just keep rolling until we're ready. So if you look at the 75, 76, it has all this stuff that the second generation had with the first generation body. So they start making all these changes to the first generation Bronco, like adding disc brakes. Like you didn't have disc brakes on the first gen until 76. They added a power brake system. So you had this big brake booster. To fit the big brake booster, they had to move the steering shaft down a little bit. And so, it's like I think somewhere in 70s, they started notching or putting a little crease in the fender for the steering shaft. But you see that move on the 76, 77. And
that's identifiable because that booster goes off at an angle.
Yep. Exactly.
To make room for that booster.
Yeah. Which you look at it and it's like, so, like how that thing is all set up. It's like totally, which is always the Bronco, but it's like so last minute kind of thinking, it's like, no, let's not redesign it all. Let's just put a bracket that's angled, to
go that way with it.
Yeah, exactly. But to allow for the brake booster, the steering shaft was lowered. They added a steering box, they changed the steering box ratio from 5.8 to 5.3 to 3.8, which I don't know if you've driven a 5.3, but it's like, you're like, I feel like you're driving a bus, it's like, all right, kids, here we go. We're going to make a left turn,
Yeah.
And the 3.8 is great. And now I think they call it the 3.75 quick ratio. But they added that collapsible steering shaft that we've talked about, because in front head-on collisions that steering shaft could become a spear.
And that's how you remove it. You pull it straight at yourself when you're taking it out.
It's so scary. So this is the big one where they did the Y steering linkage. And this is because in the second generation, maybe not the second gen, but third gen Broncos, they kind of figured out that IFS type of thing, and they did the twin traction beam suspension, which they had in the Bronco for a while. And this was kind of the beginnings of that, instead of having just the normal, steering where you had your steering linkage that went from knuckle to knuckle in a straight bar, because they were fighting death wobble. Go figure.
Yeah.
And so they did this new Y steering linkage, and because of that, they had to reshape the track bar, and they actually added in a sway bar, which it so improved the road handling manners on a stock Bronco, but they were destroying them on a lifted Bronco. And, because you would start lifting it up and the what is that? Camber would start changing, and so it added all these new problems. So, but they added a drop track bar bracket, which all of this just really did help with the road manners when you had it, stock tires, stock lift, and it really drove a ton better. And then they also the 302 compression went from an 8 to an 8.4 to 1 compression, which added a whopping 12 horsepower. And they added the Duraspark 2 distributor in there. Which it's interesting, on the 76, 77, you can see there's a notch in one of the hood cross beams to fit, because this distributor is massive.
Yeah, the Duraspark 2 or something like that.
And so, I think in my 75, I had the Duraspark 1 or something. But, so this just huge, massive thing. But I think the most noticeable thing, whenever you're looking at Broncos and you see the gas doors, that was unique to the 76, 77, and it was like that was the thing that kind of sets them apart. But what's interesting, I think, with the 76, 77 is nowadays everyone puts all of those things, except for the Y steering linkage, power booster, disc brakes. Everyone puts all that into their Bronco when they're working on it.
Yeah, they're 75 and older. Brake booster kit's like the number one upgrade.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Because they don't stop.
Yeah. You were talking about automatics. In 76, 68% of the sales were automatic, and in 77, 70% were automatic.
Wow.
So
Look at that
market
trend.
was really shifting towards the auto transmission, which was still the C4. And in 76, there were 15,000 units. In 77, there were 14,000 units. So you see the, decline because of what you said. Everyone was getting bigger and better. And even when you look at the marketing in 76, 77, it's all, we're nimble, we're quick, we, can fit through, this and fit around this. And it was all about the size being smaller was a good thing. But in reality, everyone was looking for these bigger 4x4 SUV vehicles.
They were even trying to market to a younger audience to get them to go off-roading.
Yeah.
They're just like, well, maybe if we could, then they buy it.
Yeah, totally.
But the market was definitely had shifted. I mean, look at the market today. You got suburban XLs.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
The market's huge.
Yeah. Well, there's so much more that we could talk about with these, but one thing that we always we're getting a lot of our information from Todd Zerker's book, and one of the things that I want to save for the book, because it's just Todd does such a good job of explaining it, is the whole balloon chaser Bronco ambulance kind of story with Strop and there's a whole marketing campaign with these. And when you read it, I just can't do it justice just talking about it. They talk about it in Bring Bronco Back, but I think Todd does such a good job of telling that story. I want to leave it for go buy Todd's book. It's the...
Well, and he has pictures of all of those, the Strop ambulance and the Strop... balloon chasers, what they call them. And then I would love to find one of those. They actually made some to sell too. Yeah.
Drew Peroni has one. He sometimes brings it to Supercell.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I think he brought it 2 years ago during the COVID October Supercell. I got some cool pictures. Drew's a really cool guy. So yeah, he has his. But guys, there's so much, history that we could spend hours talking about. So we'll come back to this definitely as time goes on. But we're going to close this chapter of Bronco history here, unless there was anything that you had pressing. Can we tease what's coming up a little bit?
Yeah, I think we should. We've got big plans for next season. Are you talking about our final episode?
No, next season.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Cause I mean, we're stopping the first generation here, and next season we're going to jump into generation 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe a little Bronco 2 homage as well. But it's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to, and not just like, I think we're going to dedicate a whole episode to each generation, so like, I've been looking at with generation 3, like, where do you go buy parts? Like what are, cause not a lot of the early Bronco vendors have parts for these. So stick around for those. They're going to be exciting, to talk about and to cover. But before we leave, I have, this is my Bronco swag bag right here. But we want to give away some Bronco stickers. We've got some BronCast stickers. They're, the right size to put on your, whatever you want to put them on. I don't know where I was going with that. So a little Bronco swag here. Got some stickers, the Tennessee Bronco Club sticker, and the, I don't know what you call this, the Nash sticker. But here's what we need you guys to do. We have realized that having reviews on iTunes is super important. So we're going to do a little special giveaway here. If you go and you leave a review on iTunes and take a screenshot of it or put your name on there or something and shoot us an email at questions@thebroncast.com and say, hey, I just left a review. Here's my name. Here's what I said, or whatever it is. And send us your address. These stickers are yours. We'll send you out some stickers. Because we want this podcast to grow. We want the popularity of it to grow, not for us, but so that more people hear about it, and so that more people like you guys who are watching it, listening to it, can enjoy it. So if you'll do us a favor, if you're driving, maybe not right now, but if you'll do us a favor, leave us a review on iTunes. Give us a little thumbs up and say, man, John and Donnie are great. And the man who is our producer is amazing. Something like that. Right, Josh? These cookies are amazing.
There he goes. He couldn't stand it any longer.
Now I can't talk. Close us out.
All right. While John finishes his cookie and hopefully doesn't choke on it. Thanks for listening. We have another podcast coming. Our final episode of the year is our Christmas special. And so look for that. And we'll see you next time.